This week, goal, week 3, funding and pitching. We're talking about projects. We're talking about like putting those materials together. We're talking about who you send them to, and then a bit about grant writing and fund writing as well. Grant writing, and then so it's a lot to cover in 2 hours. We'll see what we can do. So by the end, hopefully you'll have a project that you can confidently assemble and then send off to try and get some money. Remember, we've already covered, what's producing, how to get started, how to start your business, what creative materials you might need, and what paperwork you might need in terms of intellectual property. We talked quite a bit about that stuff. Again, creating materials required to take to the market. That's what we're hoping to do. Shaping that idea into tangible material, and I use the one sheet as the example for us here. And who helps you do this? Who helps you, not necessarily who helps you create that material, but some of that, and then also where you go for the money. So we're trying to put our producing that we've learned in the last 2 weeks into action now. We will talk a bit about fund writing, grant writing, those materials, your pitch a little bit, and where to go with your ideas. And we'll talk about budget again, the 2 sides of the budget being financial scenario and expenses. So hopefully by the end of today and these 3 weeks, you'll know what a one sheet looks like, how to put it together, who to send it to as some examples, and then a little bit on how, if they say ask for more, or there's public funds that you can go after too. We'll talk a bit about that. And we'll skip this because we know everyone already. So this week, finding the money and successful budgeting and applications is quite redundant. Honing your materials, we know all this stuff, your pitch. Okay, so last week, I asked you to do a bit of homework, which was make sure you have like a 1 page that is your business plan. It really helps you get an idea of what you're hoping to do. That's not necessarily something you'll submit, but in some applications you are required to submit that. It's rare, but it is something you need. More importantly for this week, I wanted you to come up with a title for your project, a tagline for your project, a synopsis for your project, short synopsis, 50 words, an image for your project, not easy since you haven't shot yet maybe, but that's something to think about. And I just want to reiterate once again that you as the producer, you may be the creative, you may be the person that thought of the idea, but you as the producer is responsible for coming up with the idea, to take to market. You also typically initiate, coordinate, supervise, manage the creation and production of this film, or time-based medium, we call it. You typically secure the rights to the project. That's important as the producer. You set the budget and secure the funds, the revenue and the expenses, and you're in charge financially and logistically. So you, plus more, but that's it. Like the money, the planning, the timing, all that stuff is what you're trying to organize as the producer. So let's start producing, because now I believe, hopefully, that we all understand our role, what a producer is, what we do, and how we operate, and who we have to communicate with. We now know how to get the project. Okay, you had an idea, you saw it in a newspaper, whatever, you now know how to go out and get it. So that's just what we talked about in the previous weeks. And how to secure it, how to take that intellectual property, even if it's your own, and then do a little bit of what we would call business affairs, writing down some pieces of paper that give you what we talked about is called a chain of title. And to some degree, how to develop this idea, take that idea. We really didn't touch a lot on it, but how to creatively take that idea and decide what you want to make from it. Is it, it's a newspaper article, it's a book that you read, how is it going to be a documentary, a drama, a series, an animation, a short, experimental drama, all of that stuff, right? So lots of opportunities, lots of ways to go, but it's your job to kind of corral that into an idea that is marketable. So then remember, again, we're very narrow talking about the phase of what we're calling development. As a producer, there's many phases that go all the way to marketing and sales years after the film is made, but we're just talking about this point, which is from idea to green light. So that's where we're talking about, that place where you're like, idea, and someone has given you the money, or at least we're just talking about but really about trying to ask for the money, in fact. And remember, these are the materials that we're talking about: title, short synopsis, outline, treatment, script, budget, remember both sides. And then specifically, we're going to talk about one sheets today. And why would you need to do all of those things? I'll go back to all of them. Why do you need all those things? Well, here's some reasons. They can convey to a broadcaster, a funder, a decision maker, a commissioning editor, a juror. All of those people need to understand what format you're making, what tone the project's going to be, what style it's going to have, what genre it's going to be, how much it's going to cost, and don't forget, I'll always emphasize this, and who the audience is for that, and what team you have around you. So these are all really good things that you can sort of check off. Do I have this in my one pager, or do I have this in my email off to a decision maker, or do I have all these answers when I go into my meeting? This is great to have all this stuff ready, because you want to convey all of that, and then it's going to limit the questions they have and such. Okay, I'm going to just make sure everybody's here and no one else has come on, and that's good. So we'll just keep moving along. And lastly, the timeline, because maybe something needs to be done because it's the 100th anniversary of the building of the bridge to PEI, and you have a documentary on Make about it, and that's coming up next year. Well, that's obviously a different timeline than I'm just developing a story right now that could be made, we'll say evergreen, that it's just any time it could be made. So those are the different things, the reasons that you'd want for development. Okay, so we talked about our homework. Feels like I drank coffee, but I didn't. Homework. So creating a strong title for your project. It might be a title that'll change, but it is useful to have a strong title. We talked about that. We talked about an image that works for you. And we talked about homework, getting both of those. So find a strong image, however you do that. I'll give you some examples soon. We talked about a synopsis. 50 words, in that range, give you an idea that you can probably work in check off many of those items that were mentioned earlier. And then, so that is part of your homework. And a log line, which is typically shorter than a synopsis. It's just a tight, sweet little provocative, interesting line that you might encourage people to want to know more. So your homework was to write a synopsis. And also, I think I said a one-liner. This is even shorter than a synopsis, a tagline, just something really quick and short. Okay, so those are all your homeworks. You put it all together. If you take all of those elements and throw them all into one document, you would combine the title, the image, the tagline, the synopsis, the bio. These are a little extra things that oh yeah, maybe I should have some information about, earlier I said the team, but maybe the team is just you. But start with you. So a bio for you. But if you and the director were working together, well then 2 bios maybe. Or you and a co-producer, a partner, maybe 2 bios. So just short. And then a budget. And it might even just be, this project is a 1-hour drama, one-off that I'm doing for CBC, and I need $300,000 for it. I mean, that's better than nothing. It gives them an idea of what you're thinking. So that's very bare minimum budget, but it's something, okay? And then contact info, of course, because if you put some stuff on a material and you print it and hand it to them, then you need them to get in touch with you. Even if you email it to them digitally and they only look at the document and aren't looking at your email, they'll want to know how to get a hold of you. So that's important too. So the result is a sales tool. We call it a sales tool, and it is the one sheet. So first what we'll do is take a look at a few of these one sheets, and then we'll ask each of you if you feel like, I'll just ask you to talk a little bit about your specific project. We'll keep it tight because 11 or 9 people, 2 minutes each, that's like a quarter of an hour, a sixth of our time. So we'll just try to keep it tight, but I do want to hear from you, okay? Make sure you're doing your homework. So a one sheet, I'm going to pull off of this and just go and share some screens of some PDFs for us, and we'll see how that works. We'll try it out. But typically, I'll make a one sheet. It is 2 pages. It is one piece of paper. If you print it off, and you can flip it over, so it gives you more room than just the front of an 8.5 by 11. You have both sides, but it also would be a digital PDF, which typically would be 2 pages lined up top to bottom, and then you can share that with people. So it, again, it is useful to have it to print off, even if it's just keeping it in front of you and you don't share it with someone, and then they ask you a question, you might not remember the answer or forget a character's name or whatever, but that'll be in your hand. But you can also hand it to them, and you could leave it behind. So ideally, if you have a 15-minute meeting with someone, and then you leave, and as you leave, not before, but as you leave, if you hand it to them and then leave and walk down the hall and go home, you may be extending your time with them if they pick that up and start reading it or continue. So you're really extending that attention that you've gotten from that decision maker during that time. But if you give it to them while you're talking, then they're going to look at it and stop listening to you. So be careful about that. We're not really talking about pitching too much here. Hopefully you'll be able to deal with that later. But as an example, a one sheet is useful that you can leave behind. Also, best, it's great as an attachment to emails. I find that's really useful. You can put it on your website even in the in development section or whatever, but it's usually there's an image, so that can be useful. So let's look at some samples. I have developed lots of projects over the years, some of which have gotten made, some of which haven't, and we'll talk a bit about some of those. I'll give you an example, and then we'll see how this PDF stuff works, and then we'll go to asking you guys a few questions. So projects by others. This one is called The Trap, and it's came to me through Josh McDonald, who has written a couple feature films, Faith, Fraud, and Minimum Wage, and another one called The Corridor, which did quite well, a genre film. And so he and I were talking, and he said, I have a project. And so he pitched me the idea. And I was like, okay, let me read something. And so I read a 30-page treatment. He hasn't written the script, but he had a pretty detailed treatment. 30 pages is pretty long, so it's pretty much this film without dialogue. And I thought, that's interesting. Okay, let's go with that. What genre is it? It feels like Ghostbusters. That's probably the easiest way to describe it. It is in that genre. And so I started a folder, and just so you know, like, again, it's just a digital folder that's called The Trap, and inside it are a whole bunch of documents, creative materials, scripts, all the treatments, creative materials, all that stuff, and one sheet stuff. And also, inside the creative materials, stuff like, my one sheet character profiles, all the stuff that he's written and stuff that I've added, or my corrections and stuff like that. Also, but then don't forget that because you now have a folder on the new project, you're going to throw in like a business affairs section, somewhere where you have chain of title, the writer's agreement, those sort of documents, and try to keep it separate from creative materials. But it's useful to keep, just start practicing this idea of paperwork, keeping that paperwork, business affairs. We settled on some text after some back and forth of what is a good synopsis that works for me and for him. And then we came up with an image that we liked, and then we laid it out. And I have a designer that does that for me. And so that's what we did. And then I pitched it to people. And so far, we have not gotten any money for the project. So we're now talking about another fund that's coming up that we might pitch it to, but that's as far as we got. So let me go. I'll stop to say that it's 30-page treatment, very detailed, but that's really hard to get a decision maker to read. They want a full script, so they know really what it is, or they want something short so they can go, yes, that's great, I will read it. But it's at a weird stage, and he wants some money to write out a full script because that costs money and time. So that's what we're looking for, something to take his treatment and turn it into a full script, so we know what we want. So that's another important element when you're meeting with the decision makers, understand what you want from them. And so ideally for us, if we got 10 grand, even probably 5, but 10, 15 would be great. We could have enough money to have a writer, Joel, Josh, sorry, sit down and write a draft. So let me get out of this, and I'm going to go to a new share and see if we can bring up this document, my PDFs. So if you can see it and it's not blocked by anything, right, Maria? No,
Yes,
yeah.
right.
Okay. So again, it's an image of a building and it's from a photo, and then we just sort of, played with the photo and then have a title. And on the back side, we have some more images and a little bit of imagery, a log line, a synopsis, some bios, and then at the very bottom, our contact information. Right? So it's all the same information that was on that page, but it's just a little more appealing, a little easier to read, and you get a little more sense of the tone of it, even just by holding on to the piece of paper, perhaps. So that's it. I mean, that's all we did, but that takes a little bit of time, but that's the work I would like you guys to try to do. It shows creativity. It's an image, and we work in an image-based medium, so the people enjoy this type of sales tool, we'll call it. For what it's worth. Okay, so now let me see, but I won't even have to go back to this, but bread in the bones is another example. And I think you guys are still just looking at the one sheet. Thanks, Maria.
I see bread in the bones.
Oh, you do see it. It's just smaller, right? So you're looking at my screen right now. Okay, thanks. So I was chatting over beer with a filmmaker, and his name's Daryl Varga, and he was talking about his project, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And he had been working on it for quite a long time. So I said, well, send it to me. He had a rough draft. I went in together, we watched the draft, and I gave him some notes, and we just have been continuing to work on it. And I was like, well, maybe it's ready to pitch soon, so let's develop something. So it's a featured documentary. It's in post-production, and so let's just go to that, and I'll just show you. Again, all we did was take some elements and turn it into one sheet to try to sell it and give it to, and that way I could send it to people and say, hey, do you want to take a look at this? So you guys can see that now. Thanks, Maria. Bread in the bones. Just again, it's kind of, we found an image, stock image, bought it for $30 or something. The poetry, pleasure, and politics of bread. So we came up with a tagline. We have a title. We know what it is. It says Spring 2020. It's done, but not quite out. So we may have to update that if we're sending that out. And this is the backside, which again, bread in the bones, repeat the thing, a little new image, a little bit of a synopsis, a bio of Daryl, some more images because he's made the film. So we have more to play with, and then some contact info. And that's it. That's a one sheet, pretty simple. And I sent that off to a few distributors, and distributors are useful because if they like it and they want to distribute it, they do the work for you to get it into places like decision makers and try and sell it. So and then I had some meetings, sit down meetings with them, and we have a couple that are interested and want to see the full project when it's ready. So that's another example. Which one was Astronoobs, right? Yes. So this is a one sheet. Again, it's an animation, so we really could practically take the images from the animation and use them because it was already a short film that was made. So it's pretty fun and light, and we kind of built in the information kind of in a different way as opposed to just typing on a screen. So it gives it a little more. It shows the producers, a little bit of contact info. It's a little more fun. This isn't a great font. I hope you guys can see that. But it's, let me know if you can. Just say no, but if you can. So it's just like pretty light, pretty simple way of, I don't know, getting the information across. But it's kind of a comedy, so we try to do it in a bit lighter, fun way. So we get a bio for the creator, and that's it. You know, again, that's what we created. Wonder what happens. Let me try this this QuickTime, and you can just maybe watch something. This will be our break, maybe. We won't have time for another one. We'll see if this will play on QuickTime for us. If it doesn't, we'll just move on. But it's like 30 seconds, I think, which means I'll have to set up to share, and we'll see if it works. It's just nice to test Zoom. So it looks like it's opening. So I'm going to do a new share. I'll go to here, and then I have to. We'll see. We'll see if this works because I didn't put audio, and for some reason it didn't come up. But let me know. 2, 3. Loud.
Interference with all the ugly chicks, and don't be afraid to sacrifice yourself.
Anything for the mission, sir.
Take the girl. Dollar is expendable. Soundtrack on it.
So that's an animated series that hasn't been made yet. So a project for a program, and we're used the CBC Creative Relief Fund that came up pretty recently. You have a couple weeks to put a project together. So I came up with a project called What is Boring? And so it was my wife and I, what project could we do? We came up with this. And then, so I pitched a one line directly to the person that runs the CBC Shorts. And she's like, I love it. And so I was like, okay, I'll put in a submission. Doesn't mean we'll get funded at all, but I was able to get direct feedback to know that it's worth making that extra work to develop the idea. So I got a positive response. It's great when you can reach out to a decision maker and get at least some feedback, and then you know whether it's worth it or not. So we developed the idea. I had to find a title, had to find an image, had to find a synopsis. Just like you guys for the Creative Fund, it's pretty simple. They didn't ask for much, but we submitted a short doc proposal, and I'll just go to it right now to show you really quickly what I came up with in a very short amount of time. What is boring? So it's not laid out quite right for you guys to see, but you'll get an idea. So a one sheet, you guys see this, right? Noella, nod, yes, thank you. So a title, it's got my company, presents What is Boring. It's just an image. Obviously you have a board kit, it says a short film at the bottom, if you can see that. That's it, an image. And then the text, very small. We can blow that up, but I don't think we need to. You get a title, you get a tagline, which is really just a quote, and then some information. Now, of course, it doesn't have bio, it doesn't have address, dates, how much money. Those were asked separately in the application, which many of us know now. So, but we just did a Dropbox, put this on the Dropbox, and so this is the synopsis that they'll get, or they please describe the project in one page or less. But at least when they open it, they'll get an image, they'll get this. And in fact, we had titled it, What is Boredom? And I thought, what is boring is better double play, because what is boring and also what's boring are two different things. So it gives it it's a little more interesting, not much, but it's better. So we were able to switch out the Dropbox image and they will get it. So even if we made a better synopsis or we made changes to the application, I can change the application because it's a link, right? So you can improve things even after the deadline if they haven't looked at it yet. So just some quick little tips there, but that's just what we did on that project. And so let me go back and we'll get through a couple more of these and then we'll move on away from this. But I'll just show you a few more one sheets maybe. So at one point I came up with my own idea for a project, sharks and surfing. I like surfing. I like nature and sharks, and I mostly am, I write. So I've written feature scripts about surfing before, but this one I was like, okay, let's do this. It's a suspense horror. I found the genre. I wrote a treatment. I did the 10-page treatment because it was a requirement for Finn for their writing program, which was called Scripts Out Loud at the time. I got into the program, so I wrote a script, and then I developed that script and went through Telefilm to develop it. And then I found some other partners to work with on the project, and then we developed that even more. And then it went through the Whistler Feature Film Lab and the Los Cabos Figueroa Film Fund, and I took it to Transatlantic Partners and a few things. So it's been around for quite a while. Like he even took it to boot camp and worked on that project. So it's been around for a while, and so that's Shred, and I'll just show you a couple renditions of some one sheets that I've had over the years. A really early one, which is like before anything was really written. It's like you know, and you can see the watermarks because we didn't even use it, but it's a film. I have a title and I have not much, you know, it's a start. A surfboard with a bite of some blood on it is pretty lame. Another version, also pretty weak, not very interesting. We didn't even use it. So these are just some mock-ups. And then I got something a little, I was in Hawaii and I took some photos of a surfboard and put ketchup on it and put it in the water like a broken surfboard. I was, you know, just trying different things, but I didn't use those. So this is kind of, we're like, okay, this is something. It's pretty early on. And so you have the title. It is more of a sales sheet. And on the back, once it loads properly, you can see like a bad tagline, an old tagline, a bio. It was a found footage film at the time, so we used a camera, you know, we put a little shark fin in it, you know, and it's got the contact information and a synopsis and a bio and then an image on the front. Not great. It's obviously a couple images amalgamated. Again, not great. I will close those. And then I came up with, there's a couple, you know, again, this has been 5-6 years. So here's another one where we had a designer do some animation, sort of draw some stuff. This is a little better. Tagline got a little better, but made it sort of more like a poster for a film. So you get the tone, you get the genre, that kind of stuff. And this is what we're kind of working with now, which is a one sheet, again, a digital way to display it, not up and down, but beside each other. This is pretty wordy. We had this at Cannes, I think, or Berlin, to just try to attract people. So again, it's still feels a little exploitative to me. I did a new one where I cut the butt off so you wouldn't see as much of that, and it feels a little less you know, misogynist, I guess. Now it feels a little better, but it's still similar to this, which is a design that we're using, which sort of tells the story a little bit because you get the surfboard and the shark. Anyway, and then you get some bios, and they even, my co-producers put their images in because it was at a market. So just some examples of one sheets. Again, it's not laid out that interesting, but the image, we actually printed a business card with this on it, and it is a very effective business card. When I meet with genre distributors, I just hand them the card. Even if I don't even bring this project, they look at it and they're like, oh, can we talk about that one? And so I end up having chats with people just based on that image, which obviously isn't in the film because we haven't even shot a teaser yet or anything. So there we go. Maybe there's some more. I'll give you one more, which is current, and then we'll move on because we're almost at the top of the hour. I've got two. Leon Stars. So strategic partners, just as an example, this is an older project. It's done, it's made, but it was an idea that a friend of mine at the time, he was at an art show and saw some photos and went, wow, those are amazing photos. So then he's like, what, that could be a cool documentary. So then Alan tells me about it, and then I'm like, oh, that is a cool idea. So let's make a film about it. Well, whose photos are they? They're Fiona's. So we contacted her. She's a New York photographer, and she did this for Sports Illustrated, the photos, but she used them in an exhibit. And then we got her on board as a producer, and then we eventually raised some funds and stuff, and then we got Nardi, I can't even remember her first name now. Natty, sorry, I apologize, on board, and she's a good editor, so she could put stuff together. She's also from the country that the subject was from, and we developed that together. And then I got an executive producer on board who had worked at CBC and had helped commission work for me in the past, but then he was an independent producer. So then we got a team, strategic partnerships, getting other people together with you to help you make something. And it was eventually turned into a 1-hour social issues documentary. I'll just show you quickly because it is, again, fairly developed. Don't get depressed. There's a lot to it. That one sheet, it is called Leon Stars. And I just want to show you as an example. So the one sheet, and I showed you this last week, it's just an image, but again, a good image because we took a photo that we had and used it. And we had a tagline, we have a synopsis, you know, and then again, I want to show you the synopsis. We had images because we had gone there to shoot because we raised money through Kickstarter. And then we have a team, all the different people involved, a format even. And then notice down at the bottom, you have like the little TIFF logo and the little Kickstarter logo. and some, you know, social media because we had started to build it up. We had money from Sundance. So all these things get added to the sales sheet because then it helps when, for instance, we went to Hot Docs and got invited to pitch at the forum, but it's because we had all these teams. So it's like, it's a snowball. Once you get success, you want to build on that success. And so this is a very, you know, I'd say advanced one sheet that has all of this stuff. But I will show you again, because we're going to talk about this in a minute, which is, here's was an early on, and it was just based, this is what our first one sheet was, which was just based on a photo that was part of the exhibit that Fiona gave us. So still a pretty good image, but you know, and then we had images. These were just stills before we went to Sierra Leone to shoot. This is what we had. So, and it was at that time of webisodes and really long and synopsis. So a pretty detailed 4-pager, we'll call it. And then we had to cut that all down. Sorry to be so quick with that. But I do want to say that the one useful thing is all these materials can be used for applications. Even that CDC Relief Fund, I wanted to make sure there was an image in our applications that we submitted, so we did. And here, this is an application to Tribeca for a fund that they have. And it's quite extensive. This is a table of contents of 33 pages of an application. But so it's again, don't be overwhelmed. This is a pretty extensive application that came after probably 20 applications to other funds, but it has filled in documents. So we made a PDF of this entire thing, but we're reusing the elements that we used in our one sheet that we created and then expanded. And then we have a detailed treatment, and we have tons of photos that we're using throughout just to keep it interesting. And then we have it just goes on and lots of different things. And then our bios, we're putting our images in for our bios, and you know, and that's helping too. So we're adding attachments to other people that are part of the project. We go back to the history of the project, and then we have all the different things. So, you know, that's halfway through the application, right? I'm just zipping through it, but that's pretty detailed and important support letters at the end. How we're the marketing plan, all of that stuff. That's a pretty detailed application that I don't expect you to have ready, but if you apply long enough, it gets there. So I just want to let you see that one. And then lastly, I'm going to touch on another project called the Arctic Passage, which is new for me. It's only 1 year from the idea. Right now, it's 1 year and 1 month old. So at the time, I don't need that right now. Sorry, I'm all over the place on this. This is going to look hilarious on YouTube. Yeah, so an idea from 2 people. Galen, okay, first of all, it's a blue chip, which means kind of expensive. Hybrid, which means a melange of 2 different types of filming. In this case, it's documentary and drama. A hybrid limited, meaning it's a set number, like 6 episodes, and that's the whole season. Limited series. So enough is said just in that to tell you a little bit about it, but it's a blue chip hybrid limited series. And it's called Arctic Passage. And so it all began, I was in the Transatlantic Partners program and met a producer from Vancouver. So we met again in Berlin. We were just hanging out, and we were both literally at one event off to the washroom together, and we were chatting, and we stopped and then talked for a half hour and came up with this idea. And then we both went home and then continued to develop that idea with him in Vancouver with a partner and me here, and pitching it back and forth, and then came up with these elements that we've been talking about here. And with those elements, we decided, we created the materials, we came up with a one sheet, and then we both met in the middle in Toronto, and then we pitched it with his partner as well at Toronto to Chorus Media, to History Channel. And so we had a face-to-face, and we didn't even have this printed off. We just emailed it after the meeting. And then TIFF comes along in the fall, so I meet a new partner there who's someone I had met in Berlin, his boss, who's a documentary guy in Scotland, and we started talking about the project. And then I went to Montreal and was at another market and met again with the Chorus guy from History, and talked more about the project, reiterated it, and talked about what we're doing. So it was further along. And then CMF had a fund, which is a partnership with Screen Scotland. I won't go into the details, but they match. And so I got Screen Scotland. We applied through the Scottish company. The Vancouver company and I did a co-production agreement. We have all our paperwork together. We apply, and now we have $50,000 to develop the project. 25 from Europe, 25 from Canada, and that's a project. So it all came from just walking to the washroom with the guys, started to talk about it, and developed it into something. And I'll just show you some of the materials really quickly that helped us get there. So we just did a one sheet initially, again with a designer here, a friend of mine. We came up with some images. It was called The Passage. We came, it's the Northern Passage, but we came up with the Arctic Passage. Just an image about the melting north, hybrid documentary series, a synopsis. That's on the second half of the page, right? A synopsis, the concept, a little bit more on, because it's a social issues item, we want to talk a little bit about what it's about. And then another image and, a tagline, we'll say it's a quote, which I think is a great quote. The format, contact information. So there were just two producers. We met, pitched it, and then I won't show you any more of that. And I'll just go to, then we had to expand it a bit further into a 4-pager, I think this is, which is for our application to CMF. So again, it looks pretty much the same, but it then goes into more details. And so we start to break out the format, and then we talk about the episodes, kind of like a mini Bible. We won't go into that too much, but gives us key characters and episodes. And again, this is all just text, but it's laid out, so it's a little more interesting. And now we have 3 partners, because we have a Scottish partner, David, Galen, and Walter, all working on it. And David works for John, and we have our own company. So now we have a whole, international team working on a little project, but we won't even be able to make this ourselves. We'll have to attach a bigger production company that has more experience with drama. And we all have enough with documentary, but so having pitched this to some of the bigger decision makers, they're like, okay, bring on someone like E1 or a bigger company that's done this sort of stuff before. So I'll talk to Michael Donovan, and we'll just, there are various people who have the experience already, and then we'll just keep going. So anyway, enough about that, but it gives you some samples there of a bunch of one sheets and these sales items and how you turn them into something. And that's that. Any questions when I'm gonna get back to this slideshow from my current slide, so it'll be the big thing that you see. Yeah, any questions? No. I will say no, so we'll move on. Cool. Yeah, where are we now in terms of time? Yeah, we got less than an hour, but we're doing okay. So you might need, as I showed you, more materials to submit than just a one sheet, right? Don't forget that. We did talk about these last week, but there are other things that you might need, like an outline, which is expanded, bigger than a synopsis, right? That's something you might need. You might need, again, they'll tell you how long it should be, but if you looked at that Tribeca application that I did, we expanded quite a bit. And then, the next stage is a treatment. Certainly for both doc and drama, you want a treatment which really goes into the detail of the plot, like from the beginning to the end, what happens. Obviously, that can be quite long. The one I talked about from The Trap, when Josh gave it to me, it was 30 pages long. That's a long treatment, but it can get that long. 20 to me is plenty, because you need people to read it as well. So that's really, the plot. You might need a script, right? And that is something, again, eventually that's something that people will need. The script is the Bible, the whole detail, the whole thing of how you're going to make something. It's useful. And again, talk about those legal items. Don't forget, you may need to submit things like chain of title. We have a deadline for Telefilm coming up on Thursday, and they do require all of the co-production agreements, all of those. It's a big application, so they require all of these documents to show that you have the rights to this project, because they're not going to say yes to something if you can't show them that you have the rights. Things like the option agreement, that you have a certain period of time to turn this idea that you've optioned into a project, and they require that you have, and 2 years or whatever, 24 months or whatever. They'll have the rules, 18 months of time to do that. The writer's agreement, you know, who's writing it, and that you own that rights to exploit that. You know, it's a writer for hire. And maybe the director's agreement, you may need to make sure that that's on. Don't forget the audience. Remember, guys, that this is something that we always have to keep remembering, that who this is for, who's your target audience. You know, keep those demographics clean and tight and understandable and conveyable, because that's something that people want to hear. If they are a broadcaster or a SVOD and that is their demographic, you're going for the same demographics as them, great. You'll notice, if you guys notice, that in CBC's Creative Relief Fund, they mentioned the power of co-viewing and the importance of that for CBC. We, you know, most of us would know this already if we've been working with them, but co-viewing is that family experience, the idea of giving them a show. If you could pitch them a show that their parents and the kids can sit down and both watch together, that is powerful for them. So you want to go to them with a co-viewing idea. So my story, I tried to wrap that around that demographic for them so that it would be checking boxes. Right? If you were taking a project to Bell Media and you were looking for, you know, you had a sci-fi show for their Spy Channel, that would be perfect. And then you would talk about the demographic that it's for, as an example. So just be aware of your demographic matching up with who you're applying to or what money you're trying to get from. I've seen a lot of people talk to me about arts councils, and then they're trying to apply with a very generic, kind of straight up, nothing wrong with it, but a straight up project, a documentary or drama that's not really fulfilling the mandate of the Arts Council, which might be more artistically leaning. So they're not going to have success when they're competing. So you have to think about the audience always, and the audience might be the jurors. Yeah, and I like to break it out, not just say one target audience, but 2 or 3, so you can kind of, it gives you a more of a focus for yourself and makes them understand that you're trying to figure it out. Okay, budgets. We're going to talk budgets for a bit. So good times. I'm sure you guys are really looking forward to this. Kind of a review. We're going to get into a bit more detail though. Simple concept, 2 sides to a budget. We know there's the revenue side, where the money's coming from. All right, so we're changing gears here. Be with me, stick with me. Budgets, where the money's coming from, and then the expenses is where the money's being spent. All right, so that's a really basic 101 budgeting. The totals need to equal. They have to be the same at the bottom on both. I explained why previously. We won't go into it. Standard, there are templates for a budget. There's even budgets for development, there's budgets for production, there's budgets for animation, there's different budgets. You can go on the Telefilm website. Remember, Renee gave us the address for the producer's handbook on Telefilm. You can also find the standard budgets, which are in Excel. And that's a great program to understand and use if you're going to work in budgets. There's also a program called EP Budgeting, which we can use, which is a little more sophisticated, but at the same time, you can stick with the Excel for now. Okay, and just remember that budgets, like most accounting, have number allocation, and I use this example that the unit publicist has an account number so that we can all talk the same language. So all of the different numbers represent different lines in the budget. That's just basic accounting as well. So nothing too complicated, hopefully, there for you. Now, there's many ways to build a budget, because people have talked about the different projects that they're doing, and you're like, how do you come up with a budget? Because you got to start somewhere. So I think one way is you can read the script and then make a budget based on that. Read the treatment, make a budget based on that. That's one way to do it. So you're working on the expense side. You build a budget from the expense side. That's reasonable. It might come out at a number that is completely unreasonable for where your money's coming from. A lot of the times, though, you work backwards from the revenue side. You're like, I'll do that music video for you. How much money do we have? We have $1,000. Okay, well, I guess that's what the budget is. And then you allocate those numbers in the expenses, right? That's one way to do it. You can, work backwards as an example, total revenue. How much money do you have? And that's one way to do it. They're both really the same thing. So let's take a little closer look at budgets. Okay, this is what we're going to try and do right now. So budgets from total revenue. You have a number in your head. Okay, here's an example. This is something that a couple people have done through Film PEI to date. There's a $15,000, I think it's going to change, but there's a $15,000 proof of concept budget. Yay, you got $15,000. Congratulations. What's your budget? Well, I guess it's going to be $15,000. Hold on a second. Maybe it could be more than that. You always look for other ways to add money to the budget. So, for example, maybe there's in-kind or deferrals. So now you have to start thinking here, because this gets a little complicated. What's in-kind and what's a deferral? An in-kind is a non-cash contribution. Now, some of you guys know this, totally no problem, but the idea is you have a total revenue, but maybe you get a rental of a helicopter. No, that's kind of ridiculous, but someone's going to give you a helicopter. You're not going to pay them, but it's worth a lot of money, so they're going to contribute that. That's a bit ridiculous, but let's just say the equipment at the center may be available to you. And a deferral is more, remember, deferral isn't meaning they're giving it to you forever. They're deferring their payment. So a lot of times someone might be like, I'll work for you. I normally get paid $400 a day, but I'll work for you for $150 a day, and we're doing this for 2 days. So the cash budget would be 150 times 2 days, that's 300. But what about that other 250 bucks if they get 400 a day? And that 400 has to be a reasonable rate that is normally expected. But that money, that's 700 bucks, no, that's $500 that is deferred. Now, what does that deferral mean? It's all in the fine print. If you write an agreement with, say, the sound person who normally gets $400 a day, but you're getting them for $150, they're deferring $250 per day. That $500, do you ever have to pay them back? The deferral says you should pay them back if you ever get to a point where you can. Now, in the fine print, you would say, if I ever make a sale, I'll give you, 10% of that sale. Oh, that means if you made $1,000 on selling it, then you'd have to give them $100, and that's going towards their deferral, and you're paying that back. All right. A lot of the times, crew forget about deferrals, and that's fine, but it doesn't have to be. It's all in the fine print. Remember that. Those are the two things to remember. Equipment rentals. Maybe they're included in, for example, this $15,000 cash award. Maybe they'll also give you some equipment, and that's not going to charge you that. Well, that's a non-cash contribution. That's awesome. You can add that to the budget. And what if you talk to a bunch of crew and their normal rates are higher than what they're going to get paid? Then you can maybe add, say, $2,000 to your budget. So suddenly you have an $18,000 budget, not a $15,000 budget. Is that making sense to anyone? You can type no, and I will explain more, but otherwise I will continue. So that is the revenue side. You've now come up with a budget. So your financial scenario is now $18,000. That's what you have on one side. Now you have to go spend it. So you've got cash and in kind. You're going to have two columns now because you want to track that. So we can say in kind / deferral, but it's all. You've got $15,000 from Film PEI. Yay. But you also have they're going to give you $1,000 worth of gear to use over those days. That's awesome. And some of the crew have said, yes, we will defer some of our fees, and that's $2,000. So now you have a total of $18,000. That's pretty sweet. It sounds a little better. And ideally, this works when we talked about it before. As a producer, you're capped on the amount of money you can make. So right now, if the rule was producers only get 20%, how much money could you make from shooting this? If it was $15,000, you could make $3,000 and put that as your fee on the expense side. But what if it's 18? Then suddenly you can put a little more in as your producer fee. Now, maybe you don't want to do that. In this example I'm using, we on the revenue side, so now that's the revenue. Now we're going to go spend that money. We have to do the budget, the expense side, and you're going to spend $18,000. No more, no less. All right, so you've got the A line, which is above the line. You've got the writer as an example, a little bit of money, the producer as an example, and then the director as an example. So maybe the director is not going to charge anything because he wants all the money to go on the screen because he wants the best project possible. He, she, or they want the best project possible that's going to be up there and going to help them get more money. The producer, as we saw, could charge over $3,000, but then maybe they're like, okay, we want to make sure some goes on screen. So what's reasonable? $2,000, maybe that's a reasonable amount. Whatever. You just work it out. $100 for a writer, whatever. It's just fictitious, but they're numbers, and they're worth more than that. So you can add in kind, obviously, and start building that up. Just as an example. Under B, which is production. A is above the line. B is all your production money. We'll say we're going to spend $6,000 on crew, and a couple of them are deferring some money, so we've got $1,000. Equipment we got to rent, so we say that's going to be $3,000. It's $4,000 total. But remember, you have to. This is key for everybody. You have to make sure that anything you put on the revenue side in kind is reflected in here. So you can't say I'm getting a bunch of equipment donated, $1,000 with equipment donated, and don't put it on this side, because if you don't, you're shorting your budget, your cash budget, right? So very confusing maybe, but just that's why it's reflected. You'll see it right here. I can annotate this for a second for you. Here we go, sorry. So yeah, so this number here is important because that equipment that you put as an in-kind is reflected here. If you don't put it here, then this number is going to be suddenly short $1,000 because you're saying you've got revenue, but it's not real revenue. It's in-kind revenue. It's here. So be careful of that, okay? That's important to remember. And then you got post money. Say post-production will cost you $2,000, we'll say. And then we've got another line, which is D, which is all that crap that doesn't go on the screen, which is insurance and actor fees and all this and that, all the banking, all these things. There's a number there. So then in the total, don't forget contingency. We talked about that last week. You have to have a contingency, which is money you didn't expect to spend, but you may have to in the end. If you don't, that's great, but then you've got to use it. But anyway, so then we have a grand total. We have a total of cash, which equals the revenue side. We have a total of in-kind, which equals the revenue side. We have a grand total that equals $18,000. Now you have a full budget. I mean, we haven't broken down the crew and the equipment and post and all that stuff, but this is a very general look at what $15,000 could look like. You turn it into 18 and then you show it with the use of in-kind and deferrals. Make sense? Let's move on. So I have an example of a telefilm template from Bill's Landscaping and Exorcism Services, a feature comedy horror film that we applied for a whole bunch of places, and the most recent one was Talent to Watch, which we didn't get through, but we'll go back to that. I'm going to just show you briefly. Hopefully this will show because we're still on the full screen. What we did with that. Bill's Landscaping and Exorcism Services. Landscaping and Exorcism at a fair price. That's not housekeep. I don't need that. Give me a second. I have to find it. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Time to do your stretch. We've got a little bit of time left. Bills, here we go. So I'm going to open this budget and I'm going to open this proposal because I'll give you an idea again. Here's a proposal that we put in to Telefilm for Talent to Watch. How many pages is it? It's a lot of pages. I can't quite see because of all the things open here. But so, you know, we have a logo. We have a little tagline, good service at a fair price. We have a table of contents. Again, it's 25 pages or so. We have some, you know, a little bit of playing, a little bit of fun with some graphics. And we haven't shot the film, so we don't have anything, but we're playing with the idea of it's an exorcism film, a jokey comedy thing. So, you know, it's got all the requirements that they ask for in the application, but we laid it out hopefully in a little bit more interesting way. So, you know, we have some actors, We've got support letters from the actors saying, yes, we'd like to be in it. We've got, so we got emailed them and said, can you give us support? So we have a bunch of people that we'd like to be in who have been in our other stuff before. We have editors, we have special effects, all this stuff. They ask for all this stuff, but we're trying to make it a little more interesting to read by breaking it up. So we're just playing with the landscaping and horror comedy with some images that we're throwing in. We got promotion and distribution plan, all this stuff that they ask for, but we're laying it out hopefully in a way that's a little bit more interesting. You know, this is kind of silly stuff, but just whatever. And then we get to all the boring documents, but we laid them all out and sent them all in a way that would be a little easier. Even just this, laying it out a little bit better. So this stuff takes time. There's a top sheet. We won't go into this. I'll show you again on another example, a more detailed one in Excel, but this is a top sheet of the Excel that we talked about. That's all they require. The budget here, a total $198,500. And so this is the expense side. This is what Telefilm, you'll see Telefilm up in the corner there. Let me annotate this if it'll give me a chance. This Telefilm is the template. You know, it's got the title, it's got the production company, that's mine, Gorgeous Mistake, producers, directors, writers, the budget, who did the budget, all this information. It's just a top sheet. I know the details are very small here, but it's just to help you, you know, just this is an application again that, oh, I gotta get out of there. I'm gonna close off annotation. And that's funny. It'll never leave. So yeah, and it just keeps going, more stuff. And that's an application with some support letters again. So I want to show you that, but let's just look. This is a Telefilm budget. This is a detail. This is old, but again, it's a top sheet, and the top sheet is a complete summary of the details, and it gets pretty detailed when you get down to it. And it can get a little crazy, and certainly for some projects, this is post-production here, but on, you know, some projects you don't have to get nearly as much detail. If you're making a music video and you have like $200 to spend, you don't need to do this much detail, obviously, but you'll notice, like, this is in the D section, there's interim financing and costs, but then you have your contingency here at the bottom. I have 3 columns here. I'll go to the top of that just for you in a second. Let me get to it. There's 3 columns here because I have, it's the cash budget, but I broke it out for labor and expenses because of the way we would do tax incentives. It's another whole workshop, but it's good to have those so you can measure them along the way and write them in. That's why I talked about EP budgeting does a really good job of doing this for you. But it's a base, this is a basic $200,000 budget, essentially, not even, this one's 100, but it's throwing in all these numbers, and you'll see A, total above, and then you get the production, which is B, all the things like labor and equipment, and then C, which is all the labor and equipment in post-production, and then D at the end, and it has actually a total of B and C for you, so you can then determine what your producer fees are, which are 10% of that, plus your corporate overhead, which is 10% of that. So we talked a bit about that last week, and it gives you the idea. But you have your detail, you have your top sheet, you know, you've got a cover page, and you're supposed to sign off on this when you submit it. So you make a PDF of this, and it can be 20 pages long. You can get rid of some of these. If there's any zeros, you can delete it. It's an Excel program, right? That is budgeting. Let's talk about where to go get your money. How about that? That would be useful now that you know how to put a sales package together. We're going to like zoom through this maybe, and then we'll talk a little bit about grant writing as well, like how to put a package together. But just briefly, you guys can look into this all more yourselves. But, you know, there's Telefilm. They help make feature films. Really, that's what they do. They do the Talent to Watch program, which is great. So there are lots of people that are able to get you know, $150,000 to $250,000 to make the first feature film, and that's a great thing. But then it's also regionally. We have our regional office in Halifax. Laurie McCurdy's the director of it. I don't know what her title is, but yeah, they do feature films. Then the CMF, which again in Halifax, what's her name? Susie McGilvery is the person that is the administrator here for the CMF. They can do digital series, like small stuff and big stuff, all kinds of stuff. You guys are probably a bit more familiar with pre-development and early development. So those are opportunities that some people in PEI have accessed recently, and they've changed that rules up again for that this year. So pay attention to that. The NFB, National Film Board, they have an office in Moncton for French and in Halifax for English, and Rohan Fernando is the main guy. Annette Clark is in Newfoundland, and that's a great place to go for documentary on digital projects, animation projects. They do all kinds of stuff. They have a program called FAPS, Filmmakers Assistance Program, and that's like up to $5,000 in services that would be great for a filmmaker starting out, a producer that's just beginning. So check out the NFB as well. Those are our, all of those are under the Canadian Heritage funding model. And I would encourage you to look into all of those on their websites. Of course, under Canadian Heritage, there's also Canada Council. So that's an arts council, and they just got a bunch of COVID money as well. So there's this new program, and I think it's up to $5,000, and they're going to announce more of that at the end of this month on how to access it. But there'll be a fair bit of money there, and ongoing, there's a lot of opportunities under the Canada Council. They redid all of their funding model recently, so I would look at them. And then there's PEI, if you're in Prince Edward Island. I think it's called the Arts Council, but there's a bit of money there as well. And feel free to add to this what else or could be available. Yeah. What else is there? Where else could you go? Film festivals do a pretty good job of having funds available and services and training. So I mentioned a few of these. Hot Docs is a good example. There's the Rogers Fund to help finish or make your documentaries. There's TIFF. We talked a little bit about that. I think in week one, there's money available. Like you could pitch, as that project I showed that Alan and Gaddy, I was saying Natty, I don't know why, Alan and Gaddy finished, but we did pitch that, and they won 10 grand. So TIFF has some money there, and so does Finn. They have a writing program and a couple other things, and some training, and Sundance and Tribeca and all kinds of places have money. So don't forget about festivals, because they do, they're really there to help filmmakers create work so they can show that work and celebrate that work. If you're making film as opposed to TV, Harold Greenberg Fund, HF Harold Greenberg Fund does short to feature program, which I think Jason and Adam turned that Harold Greenberg short to feature money into a feature that was shot at PEI last year, as you know, hopefully know. And then there's script development. They also do that, and I just completed a round of that with them, which is money to help get your project further along in development phase that we're talking about here. The NSI, I think, do they still have the Drama Prize? That's a great little program to get a good short made, a short made. Totally Television, if you're into TV, that's another opportunity. It's under film, but they do have a program as well, which is great, which I've participated in the past as well. And then the Canadian Film Centre has some programs as well. You could check into those. Festivals. This is wrong. I shouldn't say festivals, but under festivals, Rogers exists. But other funding available to you. Certainly, if you get into the TV world, a lot of the broadcasters will or have to contribute some of their revenues to help Canadian work get made. Rogers has some funds. Bell has some funds. The Bell Fund within that has funds available. Independent Production Fund, which is under the Bell Fund in a way, is great for digital series. And that's how Jeremy was able to make Going Down the Road. Is that what it's called? And correct me if I'm wrong. And also, we did Everyone's Famous through the IPF, and they just announced this year their short list of films. So that's a great program. Kojco I've never accessed. TELUS I've applied and never accessed, but there's a great TELUS application I'm trying to get done for anything that's healthy and like good for humans, like exercise or healthy stuff. There's a whole, I'm describing it very poorly right now, but look into the TELUS fund, because if you have a project that checks those boxes, that, you know, gets people up and out and healthy and all of that stuff, they have a fund for that. I'll move on before I destroy that one anymore. You know, the CBC, we talked about the Creative Relief Fund. That doesn't mean you can't keep pitching them. It had Innovation Stream, which was the development thing for playwrights and for different projects. And then they had even podcast, which we put in an application for. But then the short docs was for production. But don't forget, just because that's over doesn't mean you can't go to the people at short docs or the people at the different strands that in CBC and say, I have a project. Are you interested? You know.
Can I interject?
Yes, please.
For that particular one, Stuart Young, who's our who's the CBC rep in Atlantic provinces, has asked anybody in the Atlantic provinces who, especially PEI, who has put a project in to the relief fund to actually send it to him as well. He wants to see them. He's asked the head office to send him the projects as well, but
right.
He's really interested in helping develop the projects too.
Right. Very good. Yes. So I'll skip Bell for a second and go right to CBC Atlantic. So that is Stuart. And I had a meeting with Stuart yesterday, and that makes sense because he's looking for stuff. He has two strands really, which is land and sea, which you guys know a little bit about. That's an opportunity for, they hire independent producers or independent filmmakers to do episodes for that show. And then they also have Absolutely Canadian. It used to be Absolutely Maritimes, but now it's just a national thing. And they do 45-minute shows. So, and it's typically documentary, but also documentary music shows as well. And so generally it'll be one of those. We did Everyone's Famous on there, which was a bit of an anomaly, but they, but yeah, so that's, so 45-minute documentary or music sort of type show, or the half hour, but he's also looking for other stuff, of course, and he wants to be our champion. So yes, so that makes sense. Thank you, Renee, for that. And then Bell 5, which you guys may know about because they've been reaching out and saying that they're the non-profit part of Bell, and they are looking for really a 1 hour of content, but maybe six episodes, that type of thing, 6-7 episodes that make up a 1 hour of content, which is like, 45 to an hour, and in a budget range of 30 grand or something like that. So if you have a project that's interesting and they want the location to be kind of a character, so that's generally the idea. You can talk to them more about that. We won't go into too much detail here. Again, there's Chorus, Bell, and the rest of CBC. There's CBC National. So in fact, yesterday, a producer that I'm working with sent a pitch to Stuart, and then she said, do I still send it to the National? I was like, yes, you do. So there's other people like the Doc Channel and POV Doc, which is Charlotte Engel. The Doc Channel is Jordana Ross. So there's people at CBC that you want to still reach out to. You can go on their website. It shows you how to submit. Same with Bell. Same with Chorus. Chorus would be History, and there's others, obviously, other channels under these. So you want to just go on their sites, look around, and then figure out how to submit. And you can submit directly from the seat where you're sitting right now and make that happen. Okay. PEI Arts Grants, right. So yes, yes, go on.
Can I just ask about that Absolutely Canadian fund?
Yes.
What kind of money, what cash does CBC put on the table for that project? I will tell you that it's no, I haven't seen more than 15,000. Yeah. So 10 to 15 for 1 hour, which is pretty small, obviously. Yeah. But if you're able to make the show, for instance, I saw on last year's, you can go on and see what shows they did last year, and Song to the Sorrow was one of the 45-minute shows they put on. So obviously, Milla was able to, and the NFB were able to repackage that into a 45 and then get an extra 15 grand. as an
Right.
example. And for me, I have this show that they want, which is hopefully they'll take, which is the Elizabeth Bishop documentary that we've been working on, and there's an audience here for that. So Stuart said, yeah, we could do that. So once the film is done, we will still have to repackage it for them, which will cost some money, but then it's an extra 15 grand in the budget. So yes.
Was that already on AMI? Is that the blind woman who just disappeared under strange
No.
circumstances? Oh,
No, it hasn't. We haven't made it yet. I have the one sheet here if I can show you guys if you want, but it was in that pile that I didn't get to. But it's Elizabeth Bishop is a Pulitzer Prize winning poet who lived at one point in Nova Scotia. So there's Elizabeth Bishop house here and a following for her, but she's an American. She taught at Harvard. Anyway, so that's usually you're kind of repurposing for that money because it's so small. But there's lots of projects there that were made. There's even some that have been made with national money and regional money, and they just get it on that too. So I would look at all of I was surprised at some of them. I went through them the other day, all of the projects that were on Canadian, what did I call it? Absolutely Canadian. Yeah. So there's a strand. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, and then distributors. I just threw a few down here, but in Canada, again, if you're going to telefilm or if you're trying to get money, you might need a distributor to help you with your feature film, but it's also, they do distribute other work. There's lots of distributors that do TV and everything, but some examples, E1, that's a big one, Elevation, Raven Banner for genre, but they also have another component which isn't for genre, Pacific Northwest. Game Theory is a smaller upstart in Toronto that I'm talking to. So these are just some examples of distributors. What do distributors do? Well, they'll help they will distribute the work for you, but they might give you what's called an MG, which is a minimum guarantee up front, which is money that you can use in your financing to complete your budgeting. That's a possibility, not necessarily a guarantee, but that's something that could help. But again, any of these people, if they're interested in your project, we call that market interest. So that means someone in the marketplace, someone who wants to make money off your project, is showing interest, and having them show interest means that funders like Telefilm or CMF, sometimes these are triggers that are required, but even if they're not a trigger that help you access those funds, they're showing that other people are interested. So again, it's all about that snowball effect that I talked about in that Tribeca application. Once you get funding from someone or success somewhere, you want to put that in and itself build on success. And sometimes it takes a long time, but you can continue to build success and then build it into a complete project. There's other distributors in Canada, more art type distributors, the Canadian Film and Media Distribution Center in Montreal, 3 Mars, that's not even the full title, Winnipeg Film Group. There's many more that can help distribute your projects and get them sold around the world. And they take a cut of it, maybe 50%, maybe 20%, it all depends. They take a percentage of the revenue, but it's better than you doing all that work when you don't have time because you have to work on your next project, right? Of course, there's VOD, video on demand. There's on-demand stuff. I put SVODs. Obviously, all of these big ones are launching now and available, and we can all sit at home and pay for them. It's like the new cable. We can buy all of these subscriptions and then just watch stuff. But we can also hopefully contribute to them, make work and sell it to them. So that's something to remember, that they are also available, and they typically go to the markets as well. It's some of them are in demand and it's hard to get to them, but it's not impossible. So those are places where you can go. So we just wanted to touch on those. If there's anyone else you want me to talk about, we can take a minute or two on those. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time on applying for funds because that's important, if that's okay. So we don't have a lot of time left, but I thought, I can sort of run through the application process. I teach a grant writing workshop and it takes a few hours to do that, but we'll just sort of skim through it, right? And so remember, if you don't apply, you can't get the money. You can't win the lotto if you don't buy a ticket. I don't like that analogy, but it is appropriate. So a lot of the applications that are out there, the successful applicants are the ones that keep trying. Each application is different. You know, but each time you do one, it teaches you to be better at doing it. So I always consider it, if you consider it a learning process, even if you get rejected from it, you still moved your career along. Each one can teach you something. And sometimes, like the other day, Heritage Money came back and said, you can't use contingency. I told you this the other day. And I was like, this is the first time in, I think, ever that I didn't get all the money because they said they couldn't give contingency money. Who knows? What do you know? So you learn all the time. And they make you better at doing this job. And part of producing is being able to write successful applications. Each one builds on the previous. So when I showed you that Tribeca All Access, that was based on so many applications before it, and it just builds and builds. And so you can end up with a 30-page application that looks and reads fairly well because you've done the work. But sitting down and doing all that the first time would be so many hours, right? And it does get easier the more you do this. And you can even do some cutting and pasting, which is great once you get that, you know, I love my synopsis, I'll just keep using it. So that's very helpful as well. Understanding the application process is important. So that's why I said anytime you can be a jury member, be one, because then you get on the other side. Even just talking to the officers or assistants or the, you know, the gatekeepers at the different funds, they want the best applications for their funds. So they're going to be very helpful. So it's worth talking to them. I would encourage you always to talk to them. And then know who and how your grant is going to be judged. If it's a jury, that's different than if it's just the officer, like someone who just has to read all these applications and picks. If it's just one gatekeeper, well, that's different than if it's a jury made up of a multidisciplinary, like an arts PEI. Maybe there's a weaver, a book writer, a book binder, and a filmmaker on the same jury. You'll have to talk a different language than if it's all filmmakers, media artists, right? That's different. So understand that. The application, you know, and also just talk to people that have had success and say, you know, how'd you do it? Or could I read your application? Could I have a, you know, just peek at it and then see? Yeah. And I'm always saying, write the grant first and foremost to get the money. So that's just something I won't go into detail because of our time, but that's just ponder that and remember that. That's important too. Okay. So, I've been turned down lots. I've failed lots. So don't think that this is easy. In the last year, I've been turned down by Telefilm, by TIFF, by Hot Docs, by Sheffield, by CPH. These aren't applications for the films to play. These are applications for the funding. Arts Nova Scotia, I get turned down by them. So, you know, this happens all the time. So don't be depressed if you get a no. Just remember it's a learning process, right? Now the package, we'll just go through that quickly. The package for applications, again, it's going to be different. We talked about the Canada Relief Fund. That was a nice and simple, easy application, but certainly I put in more than they asked for. The links, they asked for links and a bio. So I worked quite a long time. We don't have time to pull it up now, but I have a company bio, then all links to a whole bunch of films, and then a filmography all put together on 2 pages that gives them all the information and more than they asked for. So remember, you know, each package is different. But as an example here, I have a whole lot of words. Sorry that it is so condensed, but you can press stop on the video and just watch it. But in the folder, you know, it's all digital now, but still, for me, like a folder is a compilation of PDFs, right? All the PDFs all put together, like it's a one document. And so it might have the cover letter, which is a great thing to include. And it, you know, especially if you can personalize it. And then all of the materials neatly laid out one after another, table of contents even sometimes, just helps people, helps the jury get to it. So the cover letter, you know, personalizes it, summarizes the strengths. That's important. For the whole document, try and get it proofread. Whenever you see mistakes in typing, I'm sure there's some that we've seen throughout this, it just reduces the confidence that the reader has in the work that you're doing. So, and ideally, I'll say most importantly, be clear and be concise. I even suggest, sorry, I'll go back for a second. that you just literally write, be clear, be concise on a piece on stick-it notes and put them on the corners of your computer. So those are two key important words, clear and concise, because there's nothing worse than reading an application that's super redundant and just keeps saying the same things even over and over again, really just because you haven't had the time to clean it up. So really, the funders, the readers, the jury, they're taxed with often just having to say no to so many applications. They're looking for reasons to say no right from the get-go. So try to be aware of that. And if you have a whole bunch of applications and you're the reader, you're like, oh, this one's just confusing synopsis. Nope. And they don't even get to the rest of it. So be careful with that stuff. All right. The synopsis, we know what that is. The rest of it, typically it'll say things like include the treatment or timeline. Timelines are popular. They love to have the timelines. It seems kind of useless, but whatever. They like to have attachments, if you have a good DOP or whatever, or the rights, all of that stuff, that's important. A budget, we talked about that earlier. Adding resumes and support letters, which I touched on really briefly earlier, but if you get like support letters from, for instance, I'm doing a documentary on Elizabeth Bishop. If you had the Elizabeth Bishop Society of Nova Scotia write you a strong letter of support and you included it, they'll notice it, they'll flip through it. They probably won't read it, they'll just see it and go, oh, that's really helpful. So that's important. That would be in the support material. And, usually you don't have to, I probably still mail in 25% of my applications are still printed and mailed, just because a lot of the foundations or some of the organizations are still a little bit slow to move, and I still have to pull out DVDs sometimes and include them, and then you want that stuff to come back, so typically you put a self-addressed stamped envelope in there. So we looked at that application, which was the Tribeca one. We were out of time, so I don't want to do that. We're going to skip through crowdsourcing because that's, and then I have a whole bunch of tips that I'm going to leave on here. There's 29 of them, but just read through them if you want, because they are just for applications. They are kind of useful to help you, just rise above. Some of them are old and obsolete, but some of them are still fresh. So just, read through these. That's fine. There's 30 of them. Just zip through them. 29, in fact. Yeah. And then for your homework, which, just for you, create a one sheet for each of your projects. It's a sales tool, but it's a practice, and you'll be able to implement those elements into other things. Practice your design. I'm not great at it. I usually hire out. My partner's good at it. Do some paperwork on your projects. Remember, just practice that, securing your intellectual property, getting those business affairs going. That's useful. And I would encourage you to submit to one decision maker this week if you can. Find somebody, send in an application, go on a site, submit something. Just get the ball rolling. You'll be surprised sometimes you'll get some feedback. Beginner's luck even, perhaps, right? So I would encourage that. I watched most of, not all of, a webinar this week that was put out by IWCC, which is the Canadian Web Series organization. There's the link to it. It's free. Katie Ullman, a comrade of mine who's in Toronto, who's done a web series, a couple seasons of it, and is hilarious. She's an actor, and she does a 1 hour on kind of from here, like greenlit and then making it, and many mistakes she made along the way. Kind of smart, really useful. I would encourage you to watch that. That link is there. That's pretty much it for us. We're out of time. We're a minute over. Thanks for participating. Email me if you want these slides. The recording was done as well, hopefully, from Renee. I think we missed sort of the second half of the first week, but we got everything else. Go get your projects into decision makers. This is my contact info. Renee, anything else? I think that's it.